Hello and welcome to KSQD Santa Cruz and KSQT Prunedale. This is Talk of the Bay. I'm your host, PK Haddis. Up first on today's show is David Carlson, a resource planner with Santa Cruz County. He's here to tell us about the county's ongoing efforts to develop a sea level rise vulnerability assessment. As those of us who live along the Pacific know, the coastline can be a dangerous and unpredictable place, particularly when strong storm systems are passing through. And as climate change continues to supercharge the frequency and intensity of these storms, what can residents and the local government that supports them do to prepare? The county will seek to answer that question and many more in this consequential study, and we're lucky to have Carlson here in studio to give us the latest information. David, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, PK. It's great to be here.
Okay, so you're here to kind of give us the lowdown on this sea level rise and vulnerability assessment. Could you just kind of lay the foundation of that study for us? Like, why is it being done, and where are we kind of at?
Sure. Well, we already know that the county's coastline is vulnerable to coastal erosion and flooding, and climate change and future sea level rise are only going to increase those impacts. And so the purpose of this effort is to assess the county's vulnerability to future sea level rise based on a scientific and technical analysis, examining future flooding and erosion impacts to land areas and structures, impacts to coastal resources such as public access, beaches, and surf breaks, and examine the impacts of different actions that could be taken to adapt to sea level rise. And then the second part of the effort is to update the county's local coastal program, or LCP. The LCP is a plan that guides land use and development along the coast and to balance environmental protection, public access, and development. The LCP is a local plan. It's developed by the county. It must be approved by the Board of Supervisors and the California Coastal Commission. And any updates to the plan also must be approved by the Board of Supervisors and the Coastal Commission. So those are the two main parts of the effort. And we're doing this because the Coastal Act basically requires us to plan for sea level rise. And further, recently enacted state legislation authored by Senator John Laird, SB 272, that was signed in 2023, requires local governments to prepare sea level rise plans by 2034. And it prioritizes funding for those communities that have sea level rise plans. It also requires the Coastal Commission to develop guidance for local governments in preparing these plans. And they've already done that, and that's what we're using as a guide to our efforts locally.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, that gives us a good foundation indeed to kind of launch off of. You mentioned, at least in part, this study is mandated by state law, thanks to Senator John Laird, who represents Santa Cruz County in the state legislature and has for many years. Could you tell, has any study like this been done before for Santa Cruz County? Maybe not quite as large and comprehensive. This seems like a huge undertaking. But are there any comparable studies, even really small ones, that the county has engaged in that you're aware of, studying sea level rise or coastal impacts in general?
Yes, and that was a good way to frame the question, because there was a study done back in 2017 that was a very basic assessment of basically overlaying a model of future sea level rise over the coastline and trying to determine from those future sea level rise measurements, what would be impacted. Mm-hmm. And it was just kind of that level of analysis. This plan is much more in depth, looking at all kinds of different aspects of those impacts and how those impacts will affect both coastal development and coastal resources, and also analyzing sort of the financial and economic impacts of different adaptation options or directions we could go.
Mm-hmm. Right. So much deeper dive, no pun intended. How about where are we at with this study? Sounds like a huge kind of years-long process potentially. Could you give us kind of a, we're looking at the timeline. Could you set us set us somewhere in terms of how far along the county is?
We've been working on the technical aspect of this vulnerability assessment for probably a little over a year, and that was initiated after we received a grant from the California Coastal Commission to cover the costs of hiring some technical experts to do this work for the county, who have done this type of work up and down the state and are very experienced in looking into these issues along the coast.
So it sounds like we're very, very early. Like the study is anything being studied yet, or is it still very much planning phases?
The study is definitely well underway, and I would say, referencing back to my introductory comments, we're probably generally about halfway through it. We're well into the technical analysis. And then the second part of the study will be then taking that technical analysis and all the feedback that we've received from our community engagement and applying all of that input and technical information to come up with good policy recommendations to present to the Board of Supervisors on how we can modify or update our policies to accommodate future sea level rise.
Mm-hmm. Right. So could you, if you don't mind sorry to use that term again, diving a bit deeper, I guess I'm just thinking too much water on my mind right now, but are there any kind of like use cases for a study like this? If you could be more specific, potentially, about like if it will impact zoning, if this gets used by perhaps local nonprofits that work in, sea level rise or coastal vulnerability. Could you give us some ideas about how a study like this will be used, other than kind of putting it into a file cabinet, in the county, with the county board?
Oh, it's definitely going to be useful. And so by identifying where we are most vulnerable and what those vulnerabilities are, such as flooding of low-lying areas or erosion of coastal bluffs, we can come up with planning policies and regulations that address those vulnerabilities and accommodate future development while protecting coastal resources. That's the balance that we're aiming for. We hope the information will help us balance the public's right to access, use, and enjoy the coastline, while also respecting the rights of private property owners to maintain and redevelop their existing coastal properties. And some questions that we're asking ourselves is, what should we update or change or modify about how we regulate development along the coast to better plan for and adapt to future sea level rise? Another question that we're trying to address is, how do we balance our vision of an accessible and economically vibrant coastline for visitors and locals alike with the ongoing process of maintenance and redevelopment of existing housing along the coast? We know that property owners want to protect their properties from erosion and flooding, but those protection measures can sometimes have negative consequences for public access and open space along the coast. And so how can we fairly balance those interests through our policy and regulation? And just some examples of existing things that we do along those lines and that we'll be looking at modifying or updating is erosion setbacks from coastal bluffs for coastal development, flood elevation of structures that might be located on the beach. We're looking at examining a range of alternatives for protection of private property. And we're looking at these at both a county-wide scale and a neighborhood scale, because we know we have various different environments along the coast where we have coastal bluffs, we have sand dunes, we have different orientations of our coastline, we have different geologic materials in different parts of our coastline, so we can't necessarily depend on the same solutions county-wide. We need to come up with solutions that might be customized to certain neighborhoods.
So you're kind of been speaking to this balance of public officials putting this study together, hiring consultants to work with various kind of striking that balance between working with members of the public and advancing this study with expert input. Let's focus on the kind of the public engagement part of this. Could you tell me a bit more about that? Are there any upcoming public engagement opportunities, or does the study involve the county kind of seeking out homeowners along the coast and just one-on-one even connecting with them in some way?
Yes, absolutely. All of that. We have done quite a bit of community engagement so far. We've had one-on-one interviews with key members of the coastal development community and recreation community, environmental community. We've had small group sessions with various community groups to get their feedback and their vision for how they would like to see the coastline in the future. We have had meetings with larger groups. Well, we plan to have a series of meetings with larger groups. We've had one meeting with the Coastal Property Owners Association of Santa Cruz County, and we are also planning a community meeting which will probably take place in late March. And so you will be hearing a lot more about that in the coming days and weeks as we plan that and do advertising for that. We've secured a venue for that. That'll be at the Mid-County Community Center at the Simpkins Swim Center. So more information on that later. And then, when we start to develop the updates to our actual local coastal plan and start talking about policy updates and regulatory updates, there's going to be a whole series of public hearings on that at our Planning Commission and our Board of Supervisors, and we'll be publishing, all the technical reports and all of the draft policy updates on our website and publishing those so people will have an opportunity to read that, provide input to us. And so nothing's going to happen without lots of opportunities for the public and the community and interest groups to weigh in.
For those that don't know, would you mind taking a second to give us a definition and also the use of the local coastal program? You mentioned a couple times. I think it would be helpful just to know exactly what we're talking about when we're talking about that.
Yeah, well, like I mentioned earlier, the local coastal program, or LCP, it's the plan that guides land use and development along the coast, and it balances environmental protection and public access and development. It is mandated. That might be not the entirely correct word, but it has to be approved by the Coastal Commission. It's developed locally, and it's approved first by the Board of Supervisors, and then has to be approved by the Coastal Commission. And what it consists of is basically two parts. The local coastal program includes our land use plan, which is our set of policies, and our general plan, which is kind of an overarching vision, and some people call it the Bible for the county. It's part of the general plan, so we here locally call it the general plan / LCP. So that's sort of the policy component of it. And then the implementation plan portion of the LCP is our zoning ordinance, our environmental regulations, our septic regulations, all of our land use regulations, sort of the rules for development in the county. So there's the policy level, and then there's the actual rules that we use on a day-to-day basis to review development permit applications. And those two parts are the local coastal program.
So as you mentioned, this study is well underway. I think I heard you say you're about halfway through kind of the study, putting the study together itself, although you've also expounded on a lot of the public engagement and steps even after it's complete, going to the board and so forth. There's a project website for this that I, perused through in advance of this interview, and it mentioned that there was, I don't know if it was some incident or if there seems to be some misinformation spreading according to the county about this study or something related to it. So I just wanted to give you a chance and an opportunity to kind of talk about that and maybe clarify if there seems to be some confusion about this study or, the county's engagement with the public and so forth.
Sure. Well, we're aware that there's some information that's been circulating amongst the coastal property owner community that's incorrect. And it includes such statements that are being circulated, such as, the county is deeming bluff top and beach properties undevelopable. And we're not doing that. Properties on bluffs and beaches have the right to both develop single-family dwellings, maintain their single-family dwellings, and improve their single-family dwellings according to the rules in the LCP. There's no prohibition on development on bluff top and beach properties. There's limitations, obviously. If you have to follow a set of rules, there's limitations, but there's no development moratorium. And then something else, some other information that's been circulated, including statements such as, minor repairs are triggering, unreasonable bluff setback requirements. And that's just not true either. The scope of a project that would place that project in the category of having to do an investigation of a bluff setback and actually set that project back from the edge of a bluff is a large scope project, like either a new house or just a major reconstruction of an existing house. It's not triggered by such things as replacing a water heater or a window or something like that. And then, another statement that's been made was that our hazard zone rules are being misapplied to restrict building rights. And what I would say about that is the county applies its existing policies and codes in response to the various types of projects applications that we receive. We've received some recent applications for multiple houses on existing beach level and bluff top lots. And those have been denied because the county's never allowed that type of increase in density in hazardous zones. The county has long had a policy of not allowing an increase in density beyond one house on an existing lot of record in a hazardous zone. So we're not misapplying rules. What we're seeing is a couple of recent examples of proposed projects that are actually breaking the existing rules, and so we had to deny those projects. And then lastly, messages have been placed out there that our local that we're making decisions on our local coastal program that without public input, and like I just explained, that's not happening. We can't make any changes to our local coastal program without going through the public process. That's required by law. So you'll see the community engagement that will be happening on this project and already is happening, and you'll see announcements and public notices for public hearings that will be occurring at the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors, and plenty of opportunity for people to provide their input before we make any decisions or changes to the local coastal program. Mm-hmm. So thanks for that opportunity. I appreciate it. We've already communicated what I've just said in various forms back out to the community in hopes of providing the right information and correct information and sort of countering those forces that are trying to confuse the issues. Understood. And just one piece of clarity for me. So let's go all the way to Z with this process, right? The board adopts the study, and it has some influence on coastal development, standards and rules. But those new rules, if there are some, those wouldn't apply retroactively somehow to existing developments, correct? Or is there some way that could happen? No, those wouldn't apply retroactively to existing developments. No. Sometimes a a rule will require you to look at maybe the history of development on a certain lot to determine what has happened in the past, and sometimes that may help determine what can happen in the future. But that's not a retroactive thing. That's just something that sometimes we have to do in reviewing an application and looking at the history of development on the property. But no, in general, our rules would not be retroactive.
Okay. Well, thanks for the clarity you've provided there. Let's switch gears back again to kind of curious to know what the county's understanding is already of its vulnerability to sea level rise, or maybe, I don't know if you have a science background. Maybe another way, I always do this. I kind of smush two questions into one, but I'll try not to do that. But there are two that kind of are lingering for me, which is the county's own understanding of its vulnerability to just strong storms. Even, I mean, we feel like it comes up often. Strong storm rolls through, and the cliff will drop away, at least part of it. But also understanding kind of like what the projections of sea level rise currently are. I don't know if you know that off the top of your head, but I'd be curious to know the county's kind of current understanding, and this study will add to that. But yeah, if you could talk some about that.
I can confirm that the county is acutely aware of its vulnerabilities to sea level rise, having experienced the last few winters. Sure. I think we're all aware of that, and that has been happening for, sea level rise has been happening for thousands of years. And coastal erosion and flooding have been happening along the Santa Cruz County coast for as long as I can remember. I've been working for the county for 35 years, and I graduated from UCSC with a degree in earth sciences, having taken one of my favorite classes on coastal hazards with Gary Griggs, prominent local.
Often a guest on this show. We've had him a couple times.
Yes. And so that was an inspiration actually for me to go into this line of work of planning and hazard planning in the county. And I've been doing that for a long time. So while we're aware that we have an existing problem and it's going to get worse, we also have the most recent report from the state of California, the 2024 California Sea Level Rise Adaptation Guide. And it predicts that by the mid-century, by 2050, so in 25 years, sea levels may rise approximately a foot. So that doesn't sound like much, but what we'll probably see, and what I think you've probably heard Gary Griggs emphasize in the past, with climate change, we're going to see an intensification and probably a greater frequency of the impacts that we're already seeing. And then beyond that is when sea level rises are projected to increase significantly. So the projections by 2100 are anywhere from the intermediate scenario is about 3 feet by 2100 up to a high projection of maybe a little over 6 feet. And when we get to those levels, that's when we're really going to start seeing some, major impacts from sea level rise beyond just the intensification and increase in frequency of storms. And so those are the state level projections, and those are what we're using in our analysis and in our mapping that you'll see when our technical reports come out. We're using those numbers to produce the maps that will be in the technical report.
Mm-hmm. Great. I think I did smush the questions together, but I do think you answered them both. So thanks for tracking that well with me here, because I do think it is helpful, at least in my own mind, to kind of separate the different impacts of climate change, right? It often sea level rise due to climate change, obviously it's very real, but that may exist on a different timeline with storm severity, which it seems like, I'm not a scientist, but from what I know from talking with experts like Gary, that climate change seems to be already having an impact on the frequency and severity of those storms. And even with, sea levels not jumping up a foot. We all of us that live here know that every time a big storm comes through, everybody's kind of worried about another slab of West Cliff or East Cliff or any cliff dropping away. We've got just a couple more minutes left here, and so thank you for such an informative interview on a really seems like a consequential study. I just kind of wanted to open the floor here for the last few minutes. If there's anything you think's worth emphasizing, or if there's anything we haven't touched on yet that you think's would be important for our listeners to know, I just kind of wanted to hand you the floor for the next couple minutes.
Well, we're really interested in engaging with the community and getting some community feedback. So stay tuned for more information on the community meeting that we have coming up. And we have a website that has a lot of information on it. And we'll be posting more information on that website as we get further into the project. And you can find that website by just typing in all one word, santacruzcounty.sealevelrise. And that'll get you to the County of Santa Cruz's sea level rise vulnerability assessment website. And a lot of the information that I've talked about here is on that website. It has a great story map, which goes through all the different regions of the county with information on the Davenport North Coast area, the Live Oak Mid-County area, the Opal Cliffs area, the Aptos, Sea Cliff, Rio Del Mar area, and all the way down to Pajaro Dunes with historical aerial photographs and juxtaposed with current photographs, some just information about the areas, like I said, and it's just a really interesting story to go through to give you a sense of the Santa Cruz County coastline, which is certainly unique in the state, but our vulnerabilities may not be unique. I mean, every California county is dealing with this issue, and it's the situation with existing development along the coast and the impacts that we're going to be dealing with from sea level rise is and the policy implications of that, and trying to come up with the policies and rules to adapt to sea level rise is, I think, commonly amongst planners thought of as one of the most vexing problems that we have in land use planning. So I'm not here to say that this is going to be an easy process or an easy public process, but we're going to work our way through it, and we are determined to be successful and come up with a policy update that at least puts us on a good footing and sets us up for the future, so that we have no regrets in the decisions that we make now and in the future.
All right, that's been David Carlson, a resource planner at Santa Cruz County, talking us through the sea level rise vulnerability assessment, which is forthcoming from the county. So we'll all stay tuned and keep an eye out for that assessment to come out, and we hope to have you or somebody else from the county back on the show when it does come out. I think it would be helpful information to keep talking about. So, David, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you very much. I've enjoyed it.